Eran,
Hey Jeff.
and so nice to see you. Wow, it's
Yeah,
beautiful there.
thank you, thank
Wow.
you.
So
Um,
at any point you can hit the little arrow button to turn the camera around to show the scenery if and when you want. There you go. Wow, so pretty. Awesome. I want to wait until exactly 10 o'clock because there's just a few people on here right now.
okay.
You're very popular around your parts. A lot of people are tuning in to see you. All right, it's 10 o'clock. So would you introduce yourself and tell us who you are and where you are?
Okay. I'm Iran, Pick. I'm the winemaker of Tzora Vineyards. I'm now in the Judean Hills region. It's only about 30 kilometers east of Tel Aviv, very close to the Mediterranean Sea,
Okay.
and about 20 kilometers to Jerusalem. So in between Jerusalem and Tel Aviv, in the middle of Israel. We are now in a vineyard called Tzora Vineyard, very quite high elevation. And the last time we met was in Waverly Inn in the West Village,
That's right.
where I lived for 4 years, probably 2 blocks from Waverly Inn.
Really? I don't remember you
Yes.
telling me that, or I was just
Uh,
too
Be-
occupied tasting your wine.
Bedford and Commerce.
Wow, awesome.
Yeah.
So I don't know much about wine culture in Israel, so I do have a lot of questions. But can you give us
Okay.
your background and how you got where you are?
Okay. So I lived in New York for a few years, from 2000, and I was a wine lover. I did a diploma at the WSET. I finished in 2003, and about that time, I decided I would like to be a winemaker.
Wow.
I fell in love with wine, and I decided I want to make it my profession. So I applied to UC Davis. I went to UC Davis, did my bachelor degree there in viticulture and enology, and plus minus after that came back to Israel, to Tzora Vineyards in 2006, and I'm here in the vineyard in the winery since 2006. That's kind of about it.
And what was the progression of, like, what job did you have when you started till now?
In Israel, it's quite simple. There's one winemaker in such a winery, and I became the winemaker in 2006
Oh, okay.
until now.
Okay, great. And when
Yeah.
people think of the Middle East, they don't think of lush greenery down there, but I know there is. So can you talk to us about agriculture
Okay.
and winemaking in Israel?
So I'll show you a bit the vineyard. This is, I hope you can see it.
Yes.
It's quite green. Usually we are, first of all, it's high elevation, but in 2020, we had a quite remarkable winter. It started very, very late, but we got a lot of rain, about 900 millimeters until now, a bit more than that, which is about maybe 60% more than average.
Mm-hmm.
So everything is quite green. Probably it will be like that until mid-May. Usually mid-April, you're gonna see already the weeds turn brown. So we have here 15 hectares or 40 acres, something like that. We grow 5 different red varieties, 2 different white varieties, and we make the blends. All the wines are blends.
Okay.
The region, as I said, is Judean Hills, so you can see the hills here. You can see the hills, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And a good day, probably not on my cell phone, but you can see Tel Aviv from here.
Oh, wow.
And you can see the beginning of Jerusalem because we are about 2,200, 2,300 feet above sea level.
I'm going to pop up with questions as they come through. Otherwise, it's hard to keep track.
Great.
Can you tell us what
Great.
grapes you grow? And then what does the word Tzora mean or come from?
Okay. I'll walk to one of the plots. If you can't hear me, I'll go back to where the last time you heard me.
Okay, we're good for now.
So Tzora is a biblical name. Tzora was where Samson lived, actually, in biblical times. And this region is a very important wine region in biblical times. They grew a lot of vineyards here for many centuries until the Muslims came in the 7th century, and the wine wasn't allowed to be grown. But about 15 towns or villages in this area are called after a vine part.
Oh.
Shoresh, which is I'm going to show you. You see a village here?
Yeah.
At the end, this is Shoresh. And Shoresh in Hebrew means roots. So it means a root of a vine. So this is also a lot of the names here are biblical names.
That's cool. Yeah, because that's one of the first references of wine is reading about it in the Bible. So clearly it is a wine region.
Yeah, and actually about 50% of the area here were vineyard terraces. There are hundreds of old presses. Some of them are thousands of years old. Old wine presses that they made wine back then.
Yeah, it's fascinating reading about the history over there. And then what grapes do you grow and what wines do you make at Tzora?
Okay, so I'm going to show you a bit. This is a Syrah. About 50% of the vineyards are Syrah.
Okay.
Are planted with Syrah. You can see we are about before bloom. So I don't know if you can see it. You see this?
Yep.
This is a Syrah bunch, and this plot is called fossils plot because we have a lot of fossils here, and we make a wine called Misty Hills. So all of our wines are blends. This plot, fossils plot, is planted. Half of it is Syrah, half of it is Cabernet Sauvignon, and it goes into a wine called Misty Hills because we have a lot of morning mists here. We also grow Petite Verdot, which actually does quite well. So all of our blends are actually Syrah, 50%, and 50% are Bordeaux blends. So it's kind of, Provence wine. You have some Syrah and the Cabernet Sauvignon, like Domaine de Trevalon is a good name that everybody knows. And maybe, I think in our climate, I think it's a very good blend.
So, and I just want to back up to the little bud you showed us. That's actually a baby flower, not a baby grape bunch, right?
No, it's a baby. No, it's not a flower. It's actually. Let me see it again. Just a second. Can you? Oh, you know what? It's against the sun. I'll go to another one. Okay. Here. Can you see it?
Yes.
Okay, this is just before flowering. So let's say in 2 weeks from now, we'll have probably flowering going on.
Mm-hmm.
And after that, fruit set and so on. So we are now about 2 weeks from flowering.
Okay. So do you have a big variation in temperature? Does it get cool there at night? This is actually the example of Mediterranean climate. So, of course, we're very close to the Mediterranean. So the variation is not huge, but we don't have very hot days. So it's about during the growing season. During the growing season, we're about 30 degrees. I don't remember in Fahrenheit exactly, but 30 degrees is not very high. During the night, about 18 degrees in July and August, and sometimes 20. Okay.
Very, very stable.
Cool. Okay.
So I'll just show you something that is why this is called the fossils plot.
Wow.
60 million years ago, there was the Tethys Ocean here. So it left us with a lot of maritime creatures. Quite awesome. And the reason we have a lot of them in the vineyard is that this plot is a bit on a slope, so agriculture wasn't planted here for many years. So it's still available.
Now, does that happen a lot that people are planting vines? Because when I first came up in wine, I tasted Yarden. So years ago, I had known there's good wine from Israel, but people don't know that. And can you speak a little bit about the growing wines of Israel?
Yes. So Let's say good wine is I think Yarden is a very good example of the beginning of making good table wine, dry wine in the early 80s. In the 90s, this region started with a lot of small wineries. One of them is Tzora in 93. Another one is Domaine du Castel, also famous in the region. Today, they are about 40.
Mm-hmm.
So if you came here in the early 90s, there weren't any vineyards planted in the Judean Hills.
Okay.
This was not this plot, but in this area, we had peaches, cherries, plums, no vines. Today, almost 100% of the agriculture in the area are vines. So it's from 0 to 100 very, very quickly. So we're going back to the old days, thousands of years ago when everything here was, not everything, but a lot of vines. We're only in the last 20 years, a lot of planting came back to the Judean Hills.
Wow. And what's your soil like there?
So the soil is very shallow. Let's look at the soil. I don't know if you can see it well. You see this?
Yep. Uh-huh.
Limestone. It's Terra Rossa and limestone.
Oh, okay.
Very shallow, about 20 centimeters, less than 1 foot.
Mm-hmm.
And below that, there's a limestone rock. So the vines actually are quite weak. They strive for nutrition and water, and that's why we have to irrigate on most of the vineyards, most of the plots. But it's also we can control very well the vegetation and so on.
Okay, so you can irrigate. That's allowed.
Yeah. Yeah.
And are there a lot of, because I just spoke to a woman in Mexico, in Baja California, the Valle de Guadalupe, and it's such a young region, they don't have a lot of rules about what you can plant and irrigation. Are there very strict rules for appellations and practices in Israel?
No.
Okay, good.
No, you can say in one word, no. No rules. You can plant whatever you want. Of course, it needs to be healthy and we can't import vines from outside. It needs to be from a nursery in Israel and so on. But you can plant whatever you want. And people here, it's like California. People here, most of the people make, let's say, varietal wines.
Mm-hmm.
I can say. I don't know if most, but it used to be a lot. Lately, people finding out that the best thing is probably to blend. In this kind of region, I think, and people also became to the thought that it's the best results are usually from blends.
Oh, okay. Do you plant any Petite Syrah? Because I know you mentioned some Bordeaux. You have Syrah and you have Petite Bordeaux, but no Petite Syrah.
No. Petite Syrah for me is a different language. I really like, as I said, Syrah very much for its aromatics and gentle tannins, and for me, Petite Syrah is a total different language.
Gotcha.
This is I'll just show you. I'm drinking in the vineyard here.
Oh yeah, this I saw that glass.
Yeah, so I brought with me one of the blends, Judean Hills. This is the white blend. 19. It's not available yet in the US, but it's from this plot. It's mostly Chardonnay, a bit of, actually it's I think 75% Chardonnay and 25% Sauvignon Blanc. And I'm going to show you something in the vineyard that I think is interesting.
Where are you? Is that deck part of the winery or a tasting room?
This is kind of our
man.
Usually we come here to relax the team. Coffee, barbecue, coffee, just relax in the middle of the vineyard. Yeah.
I love it.
This is something that I think is very important. This is Chardonnay, and you see there are white nets.
Yeah.
So this is very important in our kind of have and kind of a minerally and not tropical fruit. So we put these are the grapes flowering probably in less than 2 weeks. So we put after veraison, we put the nets like this.
Okay.
Not to get direct irradiation on the grapes. So we get very green, very acidic, very mineral flavors.
Eran, I'm losing you a little bit. I don't know if it's because you've stepped out of range or something, but could you repeat that about the nets?
Yeah, so I'm going to go back
Okay.
to the last point where you heard me. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, so I showed you the nets on the Chardonnay plot.
Mm-hmm.
In our region, if people hear us and they are interested in viticulture, in our region, it's very important to get away from the sun. Unlike cool regions, let's say the Moselle Valley or Moselle Valley, maybe not the best because it became a bit too hot in the last few years. But in cooler region where they're looking for the sun, the best Grand Cru in the Moselle are the south-facing slopes. In our area, the best plots are north-facing slopes.
I see.
So we need to get away from the sun. So the nets that you can see them here are for us a great tool to get away from the sun, to get shadow on the grapes and to get mineral and high acidity.
Awesome. Now, can you explain what veraison is for people that might not know? And then after veraison, you pull the nets up?
Yeah. So veraison is the time in the vineyard where the grapes start to accumulate sugar and flavor. For the red grapes, they change color from green to purple.
Okay.
And then you start accumulating sugar and flavor. And for the white grapes, you accumulate sugar, you lose acidity. It's a very important time. It's about 45 days before harvest. Depends on the variety. And it's a very important time in the growing season.
Gotcha. Thank you. So just in very broad terms, how is like a Cabernet taste-wise from Israel different from somewhere else? And the Syrah, like how is Israel as a wine country different?
That's a great question because today you have so many young winemakers that have a good reference of wines around the world. Like you see, the different styles in South Africa. Let's say a new wave wine country that you get a very whole bunch peppery Syrah compared to the big and meaty kind of Syrah. So in Israel you can find all styles. There are many Syrahs that are quite peppery, quite thin, more aromatic, not very interesting on the mouth. On the other end, there are wineries that like the big, velvety, ripe side of Syrah. So you get a lot of it because we are very young country making wine consistently for many years. So you have a variation of styles.
Okay. So then within Israel, how is Tzora different? And your style maybe, or that house style?
Maybe someone else could talk about it. No, I'm kidding. I don't know if different is something that I'm thinking about. I just in 2016 I became a master of wine. I didn't mention that before.
Congratulations!
And I went. Thank you. And I went through this tiring process in order to, of course, get a better palate and but mainly to get the tool of understanding the different styles around the world. And for me, what's important, and that's how I like to view Tzora, is growing the best grapes possible and making a wine that tells the story of the region, which means that it cannot be very ripe, because in very ripe wines you get the same flavors of raisiny, pruny kind of flavors. It can be an underripe wine, which usually very green and mean. So you need to find the correct balance. And for me, blending is very important because then you don't have any reference. You know, if I make, let's say, the Judean Hills White is 75% Chardonnay and 25% Sauvignon Blanc. If I made 100% Chardonnay, people in Israel would always say, it's a very good wine. It reminds me of a Macon or you know, kind of or California Chardonnay. It doesn't matter, but you always have a reference in your mind.
Yeah.
With our style and our philosophy is to get something unique, because something that, in order to tell the story of the region, you need to find your own place.
Yeah. That's very interesting. That makes a lot of sense. And I gotta say, your wines I very clearly remember you and me and Dan sitting down at Waverly and tasting your wines. Are remarkable.
Thank you.
What are the viticulture practices there for you and maybe in general?
I think not. The only thing is that we have quite an early season, although this year I saw that already flowering in some parts of California and some parts even of Burgundy. I also saw in the Côte de Beaune already flowering, so we're a bit late this year. But usually it's an early season. I think if you can say something that is a bit different, we always look, I think, in good viticulture, to get away from the radiation, to find the coolest places, the ones that don't have a lot of radiation. If you have too much radiation, you would need to put some shade. And of course, we are quite famous for irrigation techniques.
Oh, okay.
You know that drip irrigation was invented in Israel.
You guys are masters with water. There's the desalinization stuff and
exactly. Exactly. So let's say about 10 years ago, we thought we're not going to have enough water to water our vines. But since desalination, kind of the water problem was solved. And it's quite amazing, because if you go 200 kilometers north of here, you find in the winter snow.
Oh, right.
If you go 100 kilometers south of here, it's a desert.
That's wild. Yeah, the friends I'm staying with, I'm up in Connecticut with friends who are Israeli, and so we're talking about the lake that the water comes from is very high this year, right?
I think it's since '91. It's the highest.
Yeah, it's almost a record or something. So can you talk to us about the quarantine and where things are over there with you and how that's affected winemaking and just day-to-day life, because people don't hear that so much.
Yeah, so of course we are now during historic times, and the viticulture and winemaking is quite normal. I mean, it's quite the same. We are viewed as a necessary agriculture, and winemaking is viewed as a necessary how do you say that, factory or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
So we can work normal, and we work every day. In the winery, we're bottling now. In the vineyard, we're doing shoot cleaning, and sales are, like in New York. Tel Aviv is a restaurant city. The food vibe in Tel Aviv exploded about 10 years ago, and many restaurants, local cuisine. And Tel Aviv is now empty, and it's quite devastating. So, as a winery that sells most of the wine in restaurants, it's not been great. We're seeing, of course, much lower sales in the last 2 months, but hopefully in a few months we'll be back. I don't know. We're waiting for a vaccine.
Yeah, waiting for a lot of things. I have talked with winemakers in Long Island, and they have switched as quickly as they can to selling online, and people come to the winery to pick up. Do you do that there?
Yeah. It's the same in Israel. First of all, two things that are happening, and I see it, I think, all over the world. People are drinking much more.
Yeah.
People that used to drink a bottle a week, drinking now 4 bottles a week, maybe.
Uh-huh.
And they're drinking local, so this is great. I think it's a great new thing for, let's say, the Hudson River or Finger Lakes.
Exactly.
for New York, and also for Israel. That you can find in Israel. You can find the Mosel wine. You can find California, maybe Burgundy, Jura. Anywhere in the world, you can find it in Tel Aviv. I think people will restaurants, sommeliers, and people will drink more locally in the next few years. I'm quite sure about that.
I think you're right on that. There was a question about your élevage. Do you barrel age, and what kind of oak do you use?
I think so. We use for the whites. We use bigger oak, 500 liters, mostly old, for 9 months on the lees. Aging on the lees. For the reds, it's usually 1 year élevage and 225 classic élevage, nothing particular. It's very important for us to minimize oxygen during the élevage because the aromatics and the tannin in our wines are very gentle. So in the élevage, it's very important to do a protective winemaking.
Gotcha. Cool. Well, I'm keeping these kind of at a half an hour to not lose people's, I don't want to go too long and I don't want to take up your time. I really appreciate you sticking around. It is gorgeous there.
Thank you.
You made me laugh this morning with your glass of wine on your post. And it's really been fascinating and very educational. Thank you
very much.
Do you want to say anything before we go?
I really miss Waverly Inn, and I wish I could see you in 2021.
I hope we will. I'm sure we will. We'll all be back sooner than later, I hope. All right. It's a pleasure, man. Take care of yourself. Be safe.
See you soon.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.